from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Mr. Patterson, I suspect you know that currently I'm the only pharmacist serving in Congress. And Ms. Brooks makes a good point. This is not something that started in 2010 or 2011. It was going on in 2001 and 2002. I was practicing back then. Now, granted, I haven't practiced in quite a while. It's probably been 4 or 5 years since I practiced, but I still know what's going on out there. You know, we've been kind of nibbling, or you've been nibbling around the edges here. There have been great questions asked here, but I want to follow up on the questions that Representative Collins asked about the alpha, the beginning of where this problem starts, and that's the doctors who are writing these prescriptions. Now, I'm not naive enough to believe that there aren't pharmacies out there that are in collusion with doctors or filling fraudulent prescriptions, but I want to talk about the doctors who are writing these prescriptions who are obviously out of control, and why it's taken DEA so long to get them in control or under control. I'll just give you an example. I served in the Georgia State Legislature for 10 years. I sponsored the legislation that created the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program back in '09. I was jumping up and down then saying, this is a problem. We got to get it under control. And it was falling on deaf ears. There are doctors right now in our community that our pharmacists won't fill prescriptions for. They just say, no, that doctor's out of control. I don't fill for that doctor. I was working on President's Day. We were out during our session on President's Day. We were always out. I had someone come into my pharmacy, young lady who had the holy trinity of drug abuse, 180, oxycodone, Xanax, and Soma, 3 prescriptions there. I looked at them, and she gave me her driver's license from Florida. I said, I'm not filling these prescriptions. She drove off in a car with Kentucky driver's license plates. Now, I'm not going to fill those prescriptions unless I have a legitimate prescription, okay? And I didn't want to fill that, but you're putting me in the position where I've got to judge whether that patient is legitimate or not. I'm not trained in law enforcement as a pharmacist, but I want to know why, when there are doctors out there who are writing these prescriptions, why can't you get them quicker? Mr. Collins is right. You ought to be able to turn that around in 48 hours. The first time I get 3 prescriptions for 180 of those drugs, of the oxycodone, Xanax, and Soma, I know that doctor's out of control. Something's wrong there. Why? You know, I had an example. I had a doctor who we didn't fill for, Dr. B. I went home about a year ago, and some of the pharmacists were telling me, oh, they finally busted Dr. B. I thought, wow, why did it take him 5 years to bust him? We never filled his prescriptions for 5 years, but he kept on practicing. Well, they didn't exactly bust him. They got him for Medicare fraud. Didn't even get him for writing those prescriptions. Never did. Another example here, Dr. D.N. He got thousands, literally thousands of people addicted to these medications. And then he goes before the Composite Medical Board and gets slapped on the wrist. And they come back and they make him practice under the supervision of another doctor. That's his penalty. Now he's practicing. He lives on the waterfront, a beautiful home, beautiful cars, and yet thousands of people have been addicted because of these prescriptions that he was written. We wouldn't fill his prescriptions. He's a rogue doctor. We're not filling those. Tell me why it takes you so long to get to the alpha, to the beginning, to the doctors who are writing these prescriptions who are out of control. Explain that to me, because I don't understand it. All you have to do is go into a community and say, what doctors do you not fill for? And the pharmacist will tell you, we don't feel for this doctor and we don't feel for that doctor.
Well, and that's quite frankly what we have to rely on. So, you know, again, and I'm not, look, the one thing I'm not going to do in this space is shift blame any place. This is a collective.
Well, it appears to me that that's what you're doing, because Mr. Collins is right. You can turn this around in 48 hours. Just get those doctors out of there.
But in the cases of these doctors, look, when we do our reviews, we ask information, try and solicit people to essentially, you know, in the registrant community, to come in and talk about the registrants they have problems with. If that doesn't happen, then our next course is someone that's been arrested that says this is what's happening in a criminal case.
But you can understand our frustration when we don't fill prescriptions for their doctor, but for years, literally 4 or 5 years, they continue to practice.
I understand. And this is where PMP data becomes absolutely critical in this, because that isn't...
But what can we do to help you to be able to get these doctors under control? What can we do? Tell me what we can do in Congress.
It's the PMP data. is really what it boils down.
We've had the PDMP since
but
2009 in Georgia.
But sir, DEA doesn't have access to that data. It depends on the state.
Can you shut the doctor down? Can DEA shut the doctor down? Or is that up to the composite medical boards of the states?
No, if we had someone that was showing us that a doctor was over-prescribing, then
But don't you know when you get this information of pill dumping, you know that pharmacy is getting those prescriptions from somewhere? Then that ought to be an indication to you. We need to, Mr. Chairman, please. We need to go to that community and we need to find out what's going on here. They're coming from somewhere.
understood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.